Díomh Cordia agus tá fáilte roimh ar Wadden. Good morning, everybody, and you're really very welcome to this, the third of our webinar series, The Future is Bright. Forms part of our Digital Toolbox project, which we at CultureWorks are producing on behalf of the Arts Council. So welcome along, everybody. And this morning, we are really pleased to introduce innovation and practice. Some of us have leapt into the world of digital this year. Some are digital natives and completely fluent and have integrated this into their work for a very long time, pre-COVID. So some of us are late adopters. So this morning, we have three panelists who have much to say on the subject: John Gunning, Minh Kavanagh, and Maya Nunes. You're so welcome. And I want to particularly welcome Linda Shevlin, who is chairing this morning's webinar for us. And Linda is a curator who is based in County Roscommon. She has curated and facilitated both large and small-scale visual arts projects, including the Tulka Festival in Galway in 2018. In 2017, she was invited curator for the Hennessy Art Fund, purchasing new works for the Imma collection. She also curated visual arts programs for the Bealtaine Festival in 2017 and 2018. She received the Arts Council of Ireland's Curator in Residence Award for 3 consecutive years from 2013 to 2016, working at Roscommon Arts Centre and Arts Office. And in 2016, she curated Radical Actions at RMIT Galleries in Melbourne as part of Culture Ireland's 2016 international programme, I Am Ireland. So you're very welcome, Linda. So on behalf of CultureWorks, you're very welcome, everybody, this morning. And over to you now, Linda, and we look forward to a really interesting conversation.
Thanks so much, Liz. Hi, everyone. You're very welcome. My name is Linda Shevlin, as Liz said, and I'm a curator based in County Roscommon. So technically, I've been engaging with arts remotely for years. I've worked across the arts and culture industry as a curator for over 10 years now. And as Liz said, I've worked with festivals, multidisciplinary venues and local authorities. So I'm very conscious of the trauma that's been felt by our sector over the last 15 months. But we're delighted to have such an incredible panel of cultural producers gathered here today. And I want to thank all of them for taking the time to contribute to what I hope you feel will be an insightful and worthwhile discussion. We've all seen a considerable growth in the amount of creative and cultural content that's been shared digitally over the last year or so. It has been and will continue to be an extraordinarily challenging time for our industry, but I hope through this conversation we can share, discuss and learn more about the phenomenal work that's been made and produced by our cultural producers. So we're going to focus on creativity and innovative practices now and into the future. And as I mentioned, many artists and organisations have embraced digital and multimedia forms as being integral to their work, while others have adapted it as a way of thinking or a way of working and connecting with audiences, while also renewing their practice. So we're going to hear from digital artists and makers today, and from those who have adapted and converted their work for online production and dissemination. The panelists here were invited as they played a significant role in communicating the value of the arts through digital platforms. The arts and cultural producers and community really does produce some of the most creative content that is being put out in digital platforms and really pushes them in new and interesting directions. And I think what we've seen over the period of closure of physical spaces is that through innovation, our cultural producers have really shown a great resiliency in terms of adapting their processes to engage audiences and build communities digitally. And I think we can see that there's certainly a space where both the physical and the digital can coexist. So I'd like to welcome our 3 panelists. We have Maya Nunes, Minh Kavanagh and John Gunning. So each of the panelists will give us a brief presentation, and then we'll have some time at the end of all 3 presentations to take some questions from you folks. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our first panelist, John Gunning. John, you're very welcome. John is a lighting and AV designer and founder member of Malaprop Theatre. This is a Dublin-based collective of theatre makers that aims to challenge, delight and speak to the world we live in. Since theatre is closed, John has run live stream script readings, hosted front of house on Zoom, and gotten really into complicated ways of presenting Instagram Live. So over to you, John.
got the unmute button as I was pressing unmute. Thanks very much, Liz, or Linda and Liz. Yeah, brilliant. So just to introduce myself a little bit more before I kind of go into all of the talking points of how theatre has changed and digital art has become existent as far as people are aware. I have been a lighting designer for about 5 years. Before March 2020, I'm now something weirdly in the middle of being a lighting designer and other things. And obviously in March 2020, all the theatres closed, so there was no lighting to design, which meant that I was faced with the traditional art form of theatre and how actually old-fashioned it is to be people in a room actually talking to each other. It's not really the new thing. So with the skills that we had to think about how we were going to present ourselves. We also had to come to terms with the fact that the industry as a whole, theatre industry, was exhausted. It had been a particularly hard couple of years with funding being cut and cut and cut really viciously. So margins were thin, staffing was shockingly bad. So I think in March, a lot of people were kind of thankful for a break. I'm probably preaching to a choir there, or we're kind of dealing with the trauma of unproducing a lot of work. People suddenly had to take out like 2 years of work. You know, the festival I was working on had been in full planning and production mode for 2 years and was killed on the first night. So people were dealing with those fallouts for a long time, and a lot of people still are. So the initial offerings from theatre makers engaging with the digital sphere generally looked like previously existing material that had been shoehorned into the digital platforms. This may have looked like the National Theatre in England presenting archive videos, or it might have looked like script readings that were just done on as a video call. I did a few of those. But there was something not quite right. It was very obviously kind of a retrofit into the digital platform. It was a novelty effectively, and that was kind of what carried it, I think, through the first while lockdown. Not everything is going to be framed through lockdown, just this is important, I think, for the context. So then people having had a little bit of time to kind of recover from the punches or just accept that the punches were going to keep coming, it was a kind of a process of identifying what's missing. What is the missing factor that means that theatre doesn't translate in the way that we are used to presenting it onto a digital sphere. So obviously liveness is available but unreliable at a certain resource scale. So we're live now, but it's just about reliable now. Obviously it wasn't reliable a year ago. It's also a much smaller production. It's a much smaller level of production value. You know, it was considered quite exotic in February to have a video background. So the kind of means of production and replicating the theatrical experience weren't available. Also intimacy, because like performance intimacy is kind of unreplicable in that it is about being in a shared space. So it's intimacy with a performer, which is obviously dependent on a single performer, on 25 performers. That's a different kind of intimacy that does exist for being in that shared space. And also a shared intimacy with your audience, with your other members of the audience as a spectator. You are experiencing something in the same room in real time. There is some magic telekinesis that we all share. And suddenly theatre makers are at the real coalface of the attention economy. Something I think Minh might know more about as a full-time online content creator is that like ultimately you are always in competition with Netflix, which is difficult. And you have to admit that that's difficult. You have to admit that traditional theatre was a retrofit for the digital context. So how could artists make something that was digitally native? So we get into the work I started doing with other theatre artists. And this is to kind of provide context to people who might not be familiar with the concept of a lighting designer. A lighting designer is almost never a lead artist. We're a collaborative artist. We work almost as much technically as we do artistically, and our job is more about working to provide context around work of someone you might consider more of a key or lead artist. I mean, that's underselling the work a little bit, but it's kind of the way that it's useful to approach if you want to be really pragmatic. So as a lighting designer, as a collaborative artist, I had to start thinking about, or I did start thinking about, what were the elements and context that were missing from these live events or these theatrical events that weren't necessarily live. So we started thinking about platform. We started thinking about the function of various platforms and thinking of them as venues. So the pros and cons of something like Zoom, which obviously has loads of pros in that it's live, it's accessible, the install base is now huge, but has loads of cons in that it looks horrible, and you can't really do anything bespoke. You can do talking heads. Something like YouTube, which again, install base, requires a massive amount of back-end production value. And then other kind of interesting forms. So something like SoundCloud, like the idea that maybe necessarily you don't have to do a movie. You know, again, attention economy is one factor, but also being cognizant of the fact that you're missing so much in the live experience, that why do you necessarily need a visual element? Can you make audio work? Can you make work that exists as just text to be interacted with? And we're getting into really straying outside the kind of concept of sticking with theatre and theatre makers making plays or making pieces of dance theatre, but acknowledging that you kind of have to stop making theatre at a certain point. You have to make new forms and new genres that fit your platforms. So that's the kickoff point for where theatre makers kind of come into the digital sphere, is that you have to reinvent yourself. You have all of these skills of, like, you have storytelling, you have engagement, you have dramaturgy, you have writing skills, but you still need to recreate your form. You need to build yourself totally from new, effectively. And a lot of those forms still assume something of the kind of traditional form of theatre. So it's a group playing to a silent audience. So then you have to think, what are available in the new forms that isn't the traditional theatre form? So we have been looking at, with various shows that we've done over the last year, the idea of maybe asynchronous interaction. So the idea that you don't have to react to the play as it's happening live, but it is going to respond. You know, asynchronous communication is kind of the new era. So like text messages, emails, you know, that kind of stuff is all about like getting the information and just responding in your own time. That's why everyone prefers it. Also meaning that you have unexpected points of engagement for a theatrical experience. So you could be presenting a piece that appears in your phone as a WhatsApp message or a series of WhatsApp messages, and it has a new context because it's coming directly to you. It's coming in a communication form that maybe some people are way more comfortable with than sitting in a room with people. You know, you could also get into, like, there are other forms like that, like something like Snapchat and stuff, but I'm just a little bit old to really understand Snapchat implicitly anymore. I feel a bit weird. So you're disrupting, but you are disrupting those extant forms. That's one of the cool things you can do as a theatre maker, is you can break those apart. We also had to look at new skills. So people who were theatre directors kind of creating audio skills, video creation skills, video editing skills, to incorporate into their practices, because it's a necessary element to be able to express. And new points of reference. So something like Twitch is a really interesting point of reference for a theatre maker making digital work, because it is live engagement, it's back and forth, and it's a forum that kind of only exists in that forum, or in that, without any reference to any other place. So it's a great reference point. also looking at like digital or theatre makers working with new collaborators. I feel like I might be running a little bit over. So to kind of coalesce all of that, as a theatre maker, the thing that we have seen is that the possibilities of these new forms have kind of primordially emerged. I suspect the pressure is going to start coming off those things now very soon, as spaces suddenly can reopen and we can go back to the traditional performers in a space room format. But that exposure has happened. Theatre makers have had to be exposed to the digital sphere, and those new connections have formed, obviously. So I suspect we haven't seen the new genre of digital theatre, digital performance, but we have seen the germination point from which it will emerge. There you go. Thank you for listening. Sorry, that was a little long.
No, that's perfect. John, thanks so much for that. And just to remind everyone that if you have any questions, you can use the Q&A tool to just type in your questions and we'll put them to the presenters at the end of their presentations. That's really interesting, John. I've scribbled down so many notes. You've brought so many terms that I had not heard of before to my attention. Attention economy, that is a completely new term, but I am absolutely guilty of it. You know, I think that the challenge for anyone making work digitally or using these new platforms is finding that sweet spot of getting that storytelling across, but maintaining the audience's attention. Our attention is so depleted when we engage with things online. And it's such a difficult thing to judge, but I'm very excited, and we maybe talk a little bit more about it at the end, your ideas around, you know, using readily available tools like WhatsApp and text messages. And I think it's a really interesting way of, you know, the thing that's obviously missing from a lot of these digital engagements is that connection and that level of intimacy. I think the text message is such a simple tool, and the idea of using it as a device for storytelling, for theatre making, I think it kind of, in a way, it replicates that intimacy. It feels really personal, and I'm really excited to hear a little bit more about that. But thank you very much. So next up we have Maya Nunes. Maya, you're very welcome. Maya is a performance artist, among many other things, of Irish Trinidadian descent. Maya's performance practice explores ambiguity as the site of transformative potential, ritual as healing for the Afro diaspora, and song as liberation practice. Maya is also co-founder of Origins Ella, a grassroots organisation centering on the safety and experiences of queer, trans, intersex Black people and people of colour in Ireland. So Maya, whenever you're ready.
Hi, good to meet everyone. I'm Maya, as Linda said, and I am a performance artist, but I am a multidisciplinary artist primarily. And I've always had a lot of different tools at my disposal, which came in useful last year at the start of the pandemic. But I think for me as a performer, I went through several phases. I have gone through several phases of development, like throughout this past year. I think my first initial response was just shock, and then a period of sort of acclimatizing and really, I guess, interrogating how my practice can exist in this new digital landscape. Because as a live performer, like John said, one of the main things and the main sort of like key elements of my practice is intimacy with the audience, is intimacy with the viewer. And so I had this, I guess, I'd say like 8 months of just going to seed and being like, how am I going to approach this in a way that doesn't feel like a plaster, or like I'm just jumping onto making video work for the sake of it, or like I'm trying to shoehorn my practice into a format that doesn't really work for it. So the disclaimer is that I know I'm part of a very digitally oriented generation, but I wouldn't consider myself a techie person. I have some friends who are super futuristic in how they navigate technology and the digital sphere, and it's just not me. I would also argue that there are many people who are much more interested in technical processes than I am. So I'm somebody who came from a craft and textile background. I did craft and textiles in college. I'm incredibly sort of interested in that tactile, intimate, like ambient environment creating experience. And the digital world just didn't, it was never something that appealed to me. And so when I hit the pandemic, I was kind of like, oh God, how am I going to now replicate these very intimate, I was doing kind of performances for very small audiences, you know, with very sort of like subtle details. And I was like, how am I going to now push this into a digital sphere? So prior to COVID, I was already somewhat had a digital element to my practice, in the sense that I used to document everything really carefully, but I was kind of shy about my documentation and sharing it because I felt like the live performance was more important. So on my website, I had some archival footage of performances, I had photographs of performances, I had some poems typed up, I had sound works, but they were mostly unpublished. I had podcasts. I also ran a podcast called ALU. So I did have experience with sound recording and working with sound. I had been working with sound designers, but more with a view towards live performance than, you know, publishing it online or putting it into the digital realm. And I was also, I guess, building my website as a kind of online portfolio, but I didn't have a massive social media presence. I was not a video artist. I still, you know, I do now use video as part of my practice, but I'm a real newbie. I'm not someone who's like massively digitally inclined. But, you know, over the course of the pandemic and definitely in more recent times, I did make 3 really substantial pieces of digital work. One video piece that involved an 8-minute audio work that I produced myself and shot with the help of a friend who's a videographer, and then that was cut by an editor. I did one live streamed video work that was live streamed from a studio and shot and recorded by a videographer and then projected onto the window of NCAD gallery space in Dublin, and it was also live streamed on YouTube. So that was kind of a one take. The first one was kind of pre-recorded and edited, and there was like a whole post-production process. And then the second one was live stream, and it was just like really high quality live stream work. But it was one take, which was nerve-wracking because it was a piece of vocal improvisation over the course of 30 minutes. And I literally sang straight for it. And I kind of didn't think about it before I did it. I was like, oh, I'm going to be completely fine. And then I got into it and I was like, oh my God, who am I to think that I can do this vocal improvisation live streamed? And the thing with anything that's video is it does exist forever. So it doesn't feel like the same as a live performance, which people can see and you can kind of make mistakes. And there's that organic process of like, you know, making mistakes, but there being allowances for that. Because we're kind of in this digital sphere, it sort of feels like everything needs to be, like if you're doing one take, it needs to be perfect because it's going to exist forever and people are going to remember it forever and it'll probably be on YouTube at some stage, you know. So there's kind of, in terms of, I guess, as a performer, live streaming work can feel quite daunting task. And it was only when I started that I was like, oh my God, why did I set myself this? But it was an incredibly generative process actually for my practice. And then just recently, or next week actually, I'm in an exhibition in the Library Project in Temple Bar, and I have an audio work that's going to be there, and that's a 20-minute audio work. So kind of over the course of the pandemic, I've been teaching myself audio production skills, music production skills, and like working through sound a lot more. So sort of also dovetailing with what John was saying, I definitely think there's a lot of scope for working in audio formats without the need for a visual and allowing for the visual to be live, like what your environment as an audience member around you. And so I kind of went back and forth with this audio piece where I was like making it and thinking, okay, it's going to be a video, it's going to be a video, it's going to be a video. And then I finished this 20-minute piece, which leads the listener essentially through the 5 stages of grief. So as you're listening, it's kind of like starts off with a sort of guided meditation, and then it leads you through sonically through the 5 stages of grief, and then sort of like leaves you at the other side with acceptance. And the piece is like, it's about or it's kind of dedicated to like queer ancestries that we've lost access through colonization. But essentially, as I was making it, I was like, okay, I'm definitely going to make a video for this. And then as I got to the end, I was like, oh no, actually the audio is strong enough to stand on its own. And I think having confidence in that was sort of a turning point for me, and how I present my work digitally. And then I've also started making like videos for Instagram, which are just like audiovisual notes is what I think of them as, but it's like short videos that I take on my phone, along with maybe stream of consciousness recorded also into my phone, and with maybe some like Foley sound that I've recorded over the week, you know, sound of ocean, or sound of, I don't know, birds chirping, or sound of forest, or whatever it is. That I also add into it, and then I kind of collage it together into something that makes sense just using iMovie, and I'll put it on Instagram. But what I would say is that I was talking to a close friend recently about putting work on Instagram, and she was kind of cautioning me about it, because I do think that with social media, it does have a use, which is primarily, social media, I'm going to say Instagram, which is primarily, I think, marketing. And this is not from this is from a performer's perspective. So for me, I feel like everything I make is really precious. And when I put it on Instagram, it has a larger reach for sure, but it also becomes part of a stream. And that does actually impact the value of the work, or how people perceive and consume the value of the work. And so putting like entire live pieces on Instagram doesn't appeal to me personally. And it's kind of been a journey to get to this point, because I love Instagram. I'm on Instagram a lot. And I engage with a lot of really interesting work through Instagram. There's a lot of amazing stuff going on there. But I do think that my attention span is less on Instagram. And the way that I consume the work and process it afterwards is different than if I went to a platform specifically. So I've been thinking a lot about the platforms where I put my work, and how social media ties into that. And I think the way that I sort of think about it in my head is I put my audio-visual notes on Instagram for people to consume, to give like kind of an insight into my work and an idea of what I'm doing. And they're still really, you know, really personal and a part of my practice, but they're not my finished works. And that's just because I think that as an artist, you need to, and who is engaging digitally, you have to be kind of strategic about where you place your work and how you position it, depending on what you want out of it. So I don't know, I've probably gone over time, but that's me. Thanks.
No, I think we're all good for time. I think some really interesting observations, and it's interesting to see how you've developed over the last year, you know, and how it has put you in a position where you've kind of explored these new technologies that maybe you were somewhat reluctant to previously. And one thing I hadn't considered, and that's very interesting, you know, as a line performer, you know, the idea of live streaming or recording a live performance, that the legacy of the piece lives on beyond the live performance, and that kind of additional pressure as a performer where there isn't that forgiveness maybe that exists in a kind of real life physical experience. So that's a really interesting observation that, you know, I'm sure it adds that kind of additional layer of pressure to you as well when you're producing these performances. And I think it's also very interesting when you're talking about where we place this type of work. And I think there has to be an intentionality to the locations or the destinations for different work. I think different platforms suit different experiences or different content. And I think with something that has such a strong kind of contextual, conceptual and artist intent, I agree, like, I mean, the kind of flicking through a stream of content and feed on Instagram isn't necessarily going to bring you the same, I suppose, as a viewer, the same kind of level of engagement as intentionally going or being directed to a website where it feels, you know, again, we're back to this idea of intimacy. It feels like I am intentionally coming to view this work, rather than it being something that's presented to me in this sort of glut of feed that comes through social media. But we'll talk more anon. So finally, we have Minh Kavanagh. Minh, you're very, very welcome. Minh is a multimedia content creator and author from County Kerry. She has a BA in Irish and journalism from DCU and is creator of the website We Are Irish, which is designed to share good news and stories about Irish people, the country, and anything related to either. The website is a spin-off of a Twitter project which aimed to showcase various people of all shapes, colours and ethnicities that we have in Ireland today. And community building is really central to Una Ming's work. And I'm excited to hear more about how her use of Discord as a platform for running successful communities is going. Now, Una Ming.
Thanks very much, Linda. Yes, I'm going to share my screen. And just for context as well, the platform I am using, as Linda said, is Discord. And it's essentially a community-based platform to build communities. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to switch over here. Super. So hopefully you can all see that. I'll just wait for your nod or thumbs up, but perfect, thank you. So I guess I'm coming from a kind of a different perspective because I would call myself a digital native in the sense that my work has always been online. I started, I'm a journalist by trade and I finished journalism in 2012 from DCU, but I was online from 2009 and I was a very early adopter of Twitter, which was when I actually got on the platform. And since then, I've been kind of utilizing, as a multimedia content creator, I've been utilizing many platforms to create content. I'm self-taught in that respect. I taught myself how to edit video, how to edit audio, how to run communities. This one, for example, is focused, you can probably see from here, it's focused on the Irish language because I'm a fluent Irish speaker. So what my goal was that there are plenty of communities out there and spaces that that English is used, and I wanted a space that was primarily focused on Irish. So the majority of this entire server is in Irish. We have close to 1,000 members, and it's been running for the past few years. I just want to. Discord can be intimidating for people because it's a new thing to learn, and you can see already someone is typing here already in the chat. It's a very interactive community. It's like a messaging service. If people remember MSN, it's like that, but you can see everything live and in action. 1 second, I'll just type it in here. There he is. So it's really cool that we can see who's online on the right, and we have everything categorized. When people come into the platform, they come into this welcome screen here, and I direct them straight away to start here, because this is the thing. You want to make sure that it's easy for them to understand the platform as much as possible. That's the hardest thing, is that it can be daunting for a person to jump into something completely new. With that in mind, I added this starter channel with all the information that one could possibly need. It's laid out completely here on how the actual channels work within the community, but also if reading does not work for you and you want to see someone using it, I also created a YouTube video that you can separately watch of me running through the platform as well, so that if you're just not into reading text and you can't follow instructions like that, I will show it on a different platform. And I think that's really important to build successful communities. You're giving them the tools so that they don't feel completely overwhelmed. I've also included, just for a bit of fun, some slang down here. And we also, which is vital for the Irish language, is we have voice chat functionality. Now, this could work for any of your communities, depending on what you'd like to focus on. But I'm going to run through a few here. For the FAQ, it's very simple. These are just frequently asked questions of people who have come into the server. For Rowley the Conute, that's choosing your dialect. What kind of Irish do you speak? This is a bot that we've implemented. So people just pick a symbol emoji here and it comes under your name. So for example, I speak Gaeilge Carcaghlina, which is the Irish of the West Kerry Gaeltacht, and it comes over here. So you can see other people on the right who use the same dialect as you. So you're trying to create that richness, that community of a vibrant, lively community. For Fogry, very simple. It's just me. I'm only in charge of this. It's just just announcements. For other bots that we've implemented, we have the radio, so you don't even have to go outside of Discord to use the Irish radio. We've implemented 3 stations, Radio na Gaeltachta, Radio na Lifa, and Radio Fáilte. No English language stations, because as I said, if you want English language stuff, you can go elsewhere for that, but this is for the Irish language. And what we also have, which is very cool, is we also have a dictionary bot. So if you're looking for a term, you can search for it in the Folklore Gaeilge Béarla, or the vice versa English-Irish dictionary. So that's another bot that we've implemented. I see that Mirish has responded to me. There he is. See, and that's again the interactivity right there. Down here, as I mentioned, these are the voice channels. You can listen to the radio live. These are 3 channels for beginners, intermediate intermediate speakers, and also advanced speakers, which I would go into. What's cool about this platform is because it was primarily geared towards gamers previously, now it's communities, it has a very solid system in terms of video sharing. Unlike Zoom, if you share other videos, you could be dealing with dropping frame rates, all that kind of stuff, all that kind of irritating stuff. The difference with this is if you go in here, I just have myself muted, and you share, you can choose, this is going to be a bit meta, I mightn't be able to do it actually, but you can actually choose the frame rates, you can choose the resolution, and you can choose which screen, kind of like Zoom, but you can also choose it close to this, to your system capabilities. So it's not going to drop frames. You're also going to hear the sound perfectly because again, it's a live streaming platform. We also find this particularly useful when we're doing lessons, because when we go into a chat, we can share a screen. It's a more interactive experience, and in comparison with Zoom lessons, where you can only see the chat and it's gone after you close it, you can save it. Here, we actually at the very top right, I don't know if you can see it, there's a search functionality. So you can search through the entire thing, look for whatever you're looking for and go back and scroll back. It's extremely useful, and you can search for in a particular time frame as well. In terms of the topic channels, we have it broken into different topics so people can go wherever they want to discuss different topics. And we also have implemented an RSS feed to pull any Irish language articles into this channel. So you don't even have to leave Discord to look for your news. For Tangacha Ele, this is a section for any other language you want to talk about apart from English. So you can use whatever, French, Japanese, chat away. That's where you can put it in. And then down here, I suppose from a learning perspective, we have the Learning Hub, which we have the grammar section, which I only can add to, but I've added plenty of information. Again, you can search back on that information. I have a resources section, which people contribute to, which are Irish language resources. We have phrases that we put in here. This is what's really interesting and could be very useful for other communities. So as Linda mentioned, I run a website called weareirish.ie. I pull any of my articles to do with the Irish language into this channel. So it gives me also hits towards my own website in a different way to a community that people trust. And that's the big thing. The most important thing with these type of communities is you have to build the trust yourself. You are serving a community, you're not serving yourself. And that's the difference between, I suppose, promoting yourself on platforms and actually giving something of value back to the people. And this entire platform is free to use, and I run it for free. We have, if by any chance you're not fluent in Irish, which is a lot of the cases, you can go to English comments only, and this is for only questions specifically to do with the language. It's not for conversations in English, it's just for questions about grammar, etc. And then we have our glossary, and down here at the very bottom is a place called Ifrin, which is hell in the Irish language, and that's for well-trodden topics. If you really want to talk about the educational system, you can go there, but we don't allow it in the rest of the Discord. And I suppose that's just a general overview of how it actually works. For me, I know that Maya and John mentioned streaming. I've been streaming since 2017. This is not an unfamiliar platform for me because it's something that, like I said, I consider myself a digital native. I've had to use these for my entire career. And actually, because everything moved online, I was in a very good position because I already had all the experience. I didn't have to change over. All my work was online anyway. And so I was actually in quite high demand. These skills are invaluable. And I think that people realized that and had more respect towards multimedia content creators during this period of time, because they realized it's a lot of work. It's not easy for me to run this entire community day to day. And that's why I have moderators as well. So I hope that has given you a good insight into how communities like this can be run. It's not a simple fix. You do have to put work into it, but it's so worth it. As I said, I use Irish every single day because of this community. All these communities on the left, they're not just to do gaming, they're different language communities, they're artist communities, they share resources. It's a wonderful platform, and I would highly recommend it. So I hope that has been useful for you, and I'll hand you back to Linda now.
Minh, that is absolutely fascinating. And I have a 10-year-old daughter who's very reluctant Irish speaker, but I will be directing her straight to that website. It looks amazing. I think, like, you know, as the new reality of working from home is being something that will stay with us, and we've realized the importance of online communities as a way of sharing experiences and knowledge and network. And it's really interesting to see, as you mentioned, you know, platforms like Discord, which I think was traditionally a gaming platform, am I right? That it has kind of responded to this need and has diversified to address it. And it's interesting how you've used the tools in this platform even as a means of learning the language, you know, mirroring very familiar formats that we would be familiar from other social media or, you know, other online communities, and in a way exposing us to the language through the navigation. And also very interesting as well how you talk about trust. You know, in real life, communities are built on trust, and you know that same sort of ethical value has to kind of follow through when you're managing and moderating an online community. So we are open for questions now. So I have one question here for you, Minh. How do you make money from this, or is it solely a voluntary passion? Straight to the money question.
Yeah, straight to the money. I make money from it in the sense that I am a pretty well trusted person who creates Irish language content online in general. And I think that's what helps. So I actually make money through Patreon, because Patreon's cut is actually quite low in comparison to many other websites. So I have patrons who fund my work, and that I can feed back into the communities themselves. I don't make money from Discord specifically, but through it I'm able to use that to, you know, running costs in terms of my time and everything like that. And also, you know, it's very much like we share resources, I get resources in return. I can help people with their Irish, they can help me with their Irish. So it's actually mutually beneficial. But for that kind of work, for the creative side, Patreon also funds my YouTube work too, because YouTube is one of those things that the barrier to entry to earning money on YouTube is quite difficult. There's a lot of requirements to get there, and in the meantime you should consider like affiliate things, Patreon, as I said. In terms of Twitch, that's another way where I earn money online through creative endeavors. I live stream 3 times a week. But you also have to bear in mind with these online platforms, and I think people don't realize it if they're going into the multimedia sphere, is Twitch, and Twitch in particular takes 50% of what you earn, because they are hosting all the, you know, they're essentially the platform that's hosting you. You're just the entertainment. It is still a massive cut. YouTube, I'm pretty sure, is around the same mark. So that's something to bear in mind if you do go down that route. But I would highly recommend Patreon. But again, it's about that trust. I've built it up through other social media channels, and I'm known for doing Irish language things. So yes, hope that answers it.
Yeah, that's brilliant. I didn't realize that about you know, fees that need to be paid. I suppose when you're, you know, developing these platforms, is certainly something to consider if you are in it for some sort of monetary return. 2 other questions. So do any of the panelists have experience of Joseph Gordon-Levitt's hit record Community, and any opinions on this model?
All I'll say is that the last time I heard about hit record is that there was a kind of implicit problem with rights with it. That has kind of made me very skeptical of it. My understanding is that the terms of use is anything you record and send into that is owned by Joseph Gordon-Levitt's affiliates, which I think has been the big red flag.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, I've never heard of this before, so I will take your word for it, John. We have another question directed to you as well. Do you think that even with live theatre coming back into the mix, the introduction to digital will put it up to us to up our game in terms of production values? It feels like digital has shown us how to enrich work rather than being an either or situation.
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. I think the gut response, and the first thing that I think of in terms of like positive implications of digital work in live theatre going forward, is the accessibility angle. So people are now used to presenting a live stream or presenting a recorded stream. People are now used to factoring that into the production budget. It's all about budget in theatre, because like no one has any money, so doing anything is kind of, you know, what it is. And so because that's a factor that can be factored into budgets, it can be kind of expected, that angle of accessibility of it, and of that that standard being acceptable, is probably much more possible. But in terms of like the actual production values and the digital thing, I think that's really case by case. I personally actually don't really like really high-tech digital elements in live performance. I think it detracts from the interesting thing of being in the room. You know, we're kind of coming off the end of a trend of like projection being shoehorned into every production, whether or not it needs it. I don't know if anyone saw Raftery's Hill in the Abbey, which was stunning and beautiful and had this bizarre, nonsensical projection design that just added nothing. And that kind of is what I would kind of be afraid of happening in a digital thing. But like in terms of like live digital elements and the accessibility, like having the whole planet accessible as a part of your show is always going to be interesting. So yeah, I think the concept of like production values is a strange one, because I think I actually think the production values in Ireland relative to the resources available are generally really high. So I think digital will put us up to improve our production values, but actually just like fucking funding theatre would do a really good job.
Yeah, I think it is an interesting question, and I think it is, you know, the observation that, you know, one thing that has come out of the last year is, you know, really we've really seen the potential for reaching audiences that theatre makers have never had the opportunity to do before. I mean, with that comes, you know, there is this sort of extraordinarily rich landscape of theatre makers, not just in Ireland, but globally. So you're now competing on an entirely different level as well. But we're also being exposed to more international work because we have, you know, it's a sort of a reciprocal learning. So I think we will learn a lot from our experiences in the last year in terms of what we've also been exposed to. And I have a question for Maya. With your work, do you think that digital production will remain integral to your work now that you've embraced it?
I think that's an interesting question. I think the answer is yes and no. I think that for me, being multidisciplinary, the kind of core of my practice has always been the idea, and then the media has come afterwards. And so I've always been driven by sort of like a creative impulse and an idea, and then the media has kind of come in to support it. So whether that is like textile work, whether that is a performance piece, whether that is a written work, whether it's an audio work, whether it's a video work, is very much determined by I guess the core feeling of the work and what needs to be communicated. And so the way that I see this period of time is that I've kind of expanded the skills that I have at my disposal, and I've expanded sort of like the things that I'm able to play with now. And so I think the answer is yes, but I also do think I'm missing some of that live performance experience. And so I think that I will embrace hybrid forms, and also keep experimenting with digital forms, but I expect that they'll shift and change a lot over time. Like, I'm not sure that I've quite found my voice in a digital sort of way yet, maybe in the way that I would like to. And so while I have been able to play with digital forms, and I'm really excited about the pieces that I've recently made, I still feel like, you know, when you're building an artist practice, you spend years and years and years working through certain media, and digital media is no different, you know. So you work through different genres, and now I have kind of maybe digital as like a question mark genre that I've been playing with over this past year. Like a question mark for me, not a question mark in general, but a question mark for me. And so I think for me, it's like now I can see how it's been of benefit to my practice, and I can see some really exciting projects in hybrid forms. Like I have a friend who makes work about walking, and they've been doing kind of walking tours as part of their performance practice. And this kind of like active walking and the meditative active walking is like one of the like core parts of their practice. And they've been thinking about how to translate that digitally. So they've been doing kind of like walking tours where they send people maps, and they'll do the walk on a different day, or they will, you know, maybe record their thoughts as they walk, or, you know, the different ways of bringing people into that practice, but there still is a live element that's happening regardless of whether people see it or not. So I'm kind of interested in maintaining the live and introducing the digital, but finding creative ways of doing that and bridging the two.
Yeah, and I think that's interesting. Like, in, you know, over the last year, you were sort of put into a position where it was a need, and now you're in a position where you can do the work that you want. So it's, you know, as you say, finding that balance and being kind of selective about what has worked for you, and what will kind of complement your performance practice. But as I say, now you have all of these lovely additional skills in your toolkit.
Exactly.
I have another question for you, Maya, just in terms of your concern and your reluctance for sharing your work on Instagram. So we have one question here. They're wondering, which platforms would you present your work faithfully?
Yeah.
Or which platforms you feel present your work faithfully?
Okay, so I think that's hard because I'm primarily a visual artist. So I'm a performance artist, but I'm in visual arts primarily. So for me, I guess where I try to position my work at the moment is in gallery spaces, but I do make a lot of like audio work that also has musical elements. So I'm interested in presenting it across like music and art platforms more and more as I kind of like move forward in my career, and to like properly build a practice that is interdisciplinary and that can exist in many different spheres and different performance spaces. I'm really excited about that possibility for my work. But right now I'm very much positioned within like galleries. And so I can only speak to what I've done. Over this past year, I presented work on a website that was specifically built for a presentation of work commissioned by Liz Roach Company. And that had like, I think it was like 12 video pieces or maybe 8 video pieces by different dance artists who were commissioned by Liz to make individual works and then curated into a web page. So that was one format. And I think there was like a link that was sent. So for me, I guess the answer is I don't really present my own work. Other people present my work. So I don't have a platform where I put my work faithfully, because I'm usually commissioned or you know, I'm curated. And I think that's something that I'm usually, I have particular things that I like or don't want in terms of maintaining the integrity of my work. But usually it's not me who's choosing the platform.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so in many ways it's no different to real life experiences. When you're putting yourself out there as a visual artist and you want to show particular galleries, you look for the galleries that you feel an affinity to, that share similar values to you. And likewise, so you know, the dissemination of your work is very much through these partnerships. You know, it's not necessarily a singular platform, it's with the collaborators that you want to identify with, that you feel that affinity with.
Completely. And that's what was going to be one of my main points actually today, was that I've originally at the outset was like, I'm not a super techie person, but I do have certain skills. Like I'm pretty good at sound design. I'm pretty good at music production now. You know, I've done podcasts. I'm good in the sound realm. And then in video, you know, obviously I have a visual eye, I did textiles. I really enjoy that component of like making mood boards and getting ready to do a video and like sort of choreographing and practicing it, but I don't have all the skills, and you don't have to. So that's the other thing to like really hammer home. Like for me in my practice, there are a lot of people that I need to draw on to make things happen, you know, and sometimes it is through collaboration that we make our best work. And I think when it comes to the digital realm, there has definitely been I mean, I've always done performance work, which always requires a team of people around you, depending on what you're doing. Like if you're doing work in public, obviously maybe you don't need it because you're kind of trying to be incognito, but generally there's a team of people around your work, similar to theater. And so I'm actually very used to working with people to make things come true. And so with digital, it's no different. You still need, like, I still need an editor. I don't do editing myself. I still need someone to mix my audio. I don't do that myself, or master it. You know, it's about finding the people who resonate with your work, like in any other art form, and then drawing on them to make things happen.
And just as a follow-up to that question around where to place your work, the next session at 1 o'clock will be talking in more detail about digital dissemination. So if any of you are curious, please do come along to the 1 o'clock session. Let me see, we have a couple of other questions. I think we're okay for time. This is one for the entire panel. I'm interested in what impact the panelists think a drive to digitize may have on site-specific work, given that it may be prohibitively expensive to stream from non-traditional venues.
I'm not sure if it's necessarily actually that expensive if you're not. It depends, because people presume that for streaming you need high-end equipment and it has to be absolutely perfect. I mean, as I mentioned, I know I'm streaming from home and I'm using my own broadband, but what makes it more stronger is literally the connection that I'm wired in. So I don't know if that's necessarily true, I suppose. If we could break down that kind of the need for perfection, because it wasn't going to be perfect if this hadn't happened anyway, you know, nothing is ever perfect. But for some reason, people, I think, feel that because it's all digital and it's there for posterity, or they think it's there for posterity, then that it's going to be looked back in years to come saying, oh, that production value was absolutely terrible. You know, they're pointing out lighting issues, they're pointing out sound issues or whatever. But I think the majority of the people are quite understanding of the situation, that, okay, sure, your video mightn't be completely HD or totally clear, but as long as it's audible and getting the actual message across, I think that provides far more value. And certainly in terms of expense, I don't, I'm not sure about that. I'd be interested though to hear what the other panelists think about that. I
think you're right in that the drive to digitize is not actually itself the factor. It's the acceptance of, like, maybe something is occasionally in 720p. You know, because again I get the idea that it's the attention economy thing, and you're competing with like super high def stuff on Netflix and all that kind of thing. But the mechanics of streaming are really cheap. Like, I could stream off my phone. I'm kind of planning a stream in a couple of weeks where I'm just going to have my phone strapped to my bike and see what happens. And so that costs, in theory, nothing bar like 20 quid in credit. But the other thing about, so I think the really interesting thing, talking about site-specific work, is obviously one of the big things with site-specific work is that it's hard to scale up, because they're not necessarily places that are designed for large amounts of people. So, you know, I know, oh my God, what's Louise Lowe's company called?
Anu,
thank you. Anu tend to do shows that have like an audience of 20 at the very most, and more like 3 to 8 most of the time, that has to run 5 times a day. And so then you're paying, like, you know, 20 actors a fee for 3 shows a day to do a show to 8 people. Whereas like a live stream show could be much more detailed because you only have to play it to one viewpoint. I think that's really interesting in that, like, suddenly the cost thing kind of flips on its head of like, you are performing to one point, you have to do it enough times to get a cut, to get an edit, and then you can send it out. Also, interesting you didn't say live stream, because I wonder, has anyone kind of kept the Santa belief about live streaming being the primarily live in theatre? Like, generally, I think all of the theatre content that goes out now is effectively film. So it's recorded and then sent out afterwards, because it's the only way you get that level of control. Because I was saying, like, I can stream in lowish resolution with a not totally reliable connection for half nothing off my phone, or I can get a film crew on. I haven't seen loads of digital site-specific work though, weirdly, because I suppose it just becomes a short film shoot.
I was thinking, I've actually considered doing, I don't know if I would call it site specific, but for my last stream that I was doing, which was a live stream, like I said, which was projected into a gallery, and it was also on YouTube, I considered doing it outside. And I ended up doing it in a studio, which was quite, like a high-tech studio with like nice lights, and it was like a very comfortable experience. But I had considered doing it outside because I thought it would be beautiful. But actually considering weather along with, and it was like a live stream thing, considering weather along with, I guess, like internet connection and access to electricity and needing a generator and all of like those things, essentially they didn't put me off, but I was like, maybe this is for another time with a larger budget. And that did actually go through my mind. So in terms of like a live stream site specific performance artwork, which, I guess for me, it's a very stylistic and also conceptual decision what you want that digital element to look like, and whether you're okay with there being glitches or hiccups or like bits of the liveness of the digital coming into play as well.
Yeah.
It's kind of a stylistic decision to do with your own practice, like, and what you are producing as an artist. And so I suppose if I was making a piece of work that was, filmed on a phone, that would be a very that would be a conceptual decision. It would have to like sit in line with my body of work. I would have to think, okay, I'm doing this to test out this specific thing. It would need to be part of the process of my work. And so for me, I did consider doing not a site specific, but an outdoor piece of work. And in the art world, if you say site specific, that's kind of usually what I think of. Like either it's in a historical space or it's in an outdoor space. I was not perturbed, but I was definitely like, okay, maybe this is for a next time with lots of more planning, and on a longer time frame and with a larger budget, and maybe I could make it happen in a way that will sit correctly with my practice. But I think it's a personal question.
Totally. I think an element of that as well is that the effect of digital failure, like the experience of watching a live stream fail digitally in real time, is really uncharismatic. It's like, oh, the screen just goes black, as opposed to like analog video where you might get static and distortion, and there's like an interesting usable element that is like incorporatable into a practice. But I think for particularly, obviously, I'm not actually a visual artist, but like working with people who've done live digital art, part of the thing is that it is just completely uninteresting when it fails, as opposed to failure being a kind of element that you can work with. Is kind of one of the struggles of digital work.
Yeah, and I would say for me, like I tend to build performances that are like, I'm trying to create an ambience and an environment. And so if there's like a glitch, it kind of breaks the magic.
Yeah.
And like similar to live performance, where, when you're performing live, there's kind of a feeling of like, I have to hold this space particularly if you're doing anything durational or anything that's kind of like a little bit more subtle, there's definitely a feeling of like, me as a performer, I have to hold this space for the duration of this performance, and my job is literally to have conviction.
Yeah.
And if the technology doesn't have conviction,
Exactly.
then that's something that's completely out of your control and can definitely break the spell of what you're trying to create.
Yeah. I think that's like the whole thing of the intimacy in a space is there's that implicit thing of like, no matter what happens, we're all in the same space. You know, so even if something goes wrong and someone forgets their line, you can just hold the attention. Whereas you just can't do that in theatre. It's just not, or in digital.
Yeah, so it's almost like the digital has become the fourth wall in theatre making. It is that other element that needs to be considered. I'm going to be fired as a moderator because I gave you the wrong time for the next panel. The next panel is actually at 12 o'clock, not 1 o'clock. So please ignore my previous comment. And we might finish up with, I've one last question for Una Minh. I really enjoyed your book. Are you planning to write another one? This is your book on Seo, Una Minh.
Yes, I actually just finished writing a book for a client. I'm a travel writer as well, so just finished that, and I'm also working on 2 others currently. So fingers crossed.
Exciting! Now there we have one very happy attendee in our audience. So I'm going to hand back over to Liz, who is going to, I think, direct us into the networking rooms. I want to thank all of you for, I could honestly have talked to you for another hour. I have about 15 questions I had written myself, but I said I'd prioritize the audience, but it's been really, really fascinating. I'm so excited to see where your work is going to go over the coming years. And it's just so enriching to hear the positivity and the creative pivot you've all made. And yeah, congratulations to you all. And thank you very much.
And thank you, Linda, for your very able chairing of the session. It was really, really stimulating and really interesting to hear the insights from makers of work, people who occupy the space or who have successfully made the leap into the space. So from our point of view, it's very, very interesting. So on behalf of Culture Works and the Arts Council, thanks a million to Maya, to Una Minh, to John, and to Linda for your chairing of the session. Really, really, really interesting. Now, just to say that our networking is starting. So you will have received a link, and there's also a link in the chat. We're going to stick around to make sure that you successfully move over into the networking rooms, but I just want to recommend them because yesterday it means that you as an audience member can have direct access and can have a chat, a one-to-one or a group chat with any one of our panelists, and there are also some really, really, really talented technical people over in the networking room waiting to chat to you and answer your questions in relation to digital making and digital presentation. So do join us. As I say, we're going to stick around to make sure that everybody manages to make that move over to networking, and we shall see you again at 12 for our digital dissemination webinar, all about asking the question, who's looking in and how do we reach them? The really, really important question, where's our audience and how do we get to them? So thanks again, Gur míle maith agaibh go léir a ríist agus ag súil le bhuaile libh a ríist san networking seomra.